Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Daniel walked into the Newman penthouse, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fear, determination, and an unrelenting sense of justice, knowing full well that what he carried in his hands could shatter lives forever. Phyllis Summers, the ever-fearless, glamorous, and cunning socialite who had navigated scandal after scandal, who had manipulated, loved, betrayed, and survived with her signature blend of charm and ruthlessness, was now teetering on the brink of mortal danger as Daniel's discovery, a piece of evidence so explosive, so terrifyingly incriminating, was about to lay bare a secret she had guarded with her life, a secret that, if revealed, could undo every carefully constructed facade she had spent years perfecting, and Daniel, who had always wrestled with his own demons, now felt the weight of responsibility crushing him, knowing that the moment he uttered the words, the world as Phyllis knew it would end. Yet the ethical imperative, the moral pull to do what was right, would not allow him to remain silent, especially given the sinister undertones surrounding the secret, the implications so grave that not only could Phyllis's reputation be destroyed, but her very life could hang in the balance as the forces she had underestimated began to close in, shadowy figures lurking in the corridors of power and betrayal, whispers of revenge and retribution echoing through the halls of Newman Enterprises and beyond, all while Phyllis herself, radiant yet unsuspecting, was in the middle of a gala, charming the city's elite, flashing her perfect smile, oblivious that Daniel, holding the key to her ultimate undoing, was already in motion, every step punctuated by the tension of a ticking clock that seemed to beat only for disaster, the camera-worthy intensity of Genoa City's most dramatic confrontation building to a crescendo as he approached her, the evidence, a dossier thick with photographs, documents, and confessions, clutched tightly in his hand, and Phyllis, sensing an unusual chill, turned just as Daniel cleared his throat, and in that instant, the air seemed to crackle with electricity, the realization dawning on her that something monumental was about to explode into her carefully ordered life, her instincts kicking in as her mind raced through every possible scenario, calculating, scheming, trying to anticipate Daniel's next move, knowing full well that if this deadly secret, was exposed, the consequences would be catastrophic not just for her, but for everyone she loved, every relationship she had nurtured, and every scheme she had ever orchestrated. And yet Daniel, steadfast, his voice quivering with the weight of truth, finally uttered the words that would mark the beginning of a reckoning. "Phyllis, I know what you've done." And the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as time itself appeared to slow, every eye in the room suddenly on her, her carefully maintained composure slipping, her heartbeat thundering like a drum of impending doom, and as the gala attendees began to murmur, sensing the shift in atmosphere, Phyllis's mind raced back to the night when everything began, the choices she had made under duress, the lies she had spun to protect herself, and the dangerous game she had thought she was controlling, not realizing that Daniel, whose own life had been touched by her past manipulations, had quietly gathered the evidence piece by piece, navigating a labyrinth of deceit and shadowy alliances to bring this moment to fruition, and as he laid out the details, the enormity of the secret became apparent. An action she had taken in desperation, intended to shield herself from ruin, had inadvertently set off a chain reaction that now threatened lives, finances, and reputations across Genoa City, and the room, silent with shock, watched as Phyllis's expression morphed from disbelief to panic, her mind flashing through every possible escape route, every ally who might come to her aid, and yet the realization settled like a stone in her stomach that the truth could no longer be contained, Daniel's unwavering resolve cutting through the tension like a knife, revealing not just the fact of her secret, but the deadly consequences she had unwittingly unleashed. And as the layers of deception unraveled, it became clear that she was in more danger than ever before, enemies lurking in corners she had ignored, old rivals now smelling blood in the water, and even those she trusted implicitly, unsure where their loyalties lay, all while Daniel, torn between justice and compassion, prepared himself for the fallout, knowing that once this secret was public, Phyllis would have to confront the ultimate question. Could she survive the storm she had created? Or would this revelation finally bring the mighty Phyllis Summers to her knees, vulnerable, exposed, and teetering on the edge of mortality? The entire city of Genoa City, holding its breath as one of its most formidable and controversial figures, faced the consequences of choices made in shadows. And as the night descended and the gala continued unaware, the drama, the suspense, and the danger mounted to an almost unbearable level, the tension like a coiled spring ready to snap, signaling that in a world where secrets are currency and survival is the ultimate prize, no one, no matter how powerful, how cunning, how beloved, was ever truly safe. And with Daniel's revelation, the entire landscape of power, trust, and fear in Genoa City shifted, leaving Phyllis standing in the eye of a storm of her own making, her life, her secrets, and perhaps even her future hanging by the thinnest of threads. As the repercussions of her deadly secret began to ripple outward in waves of shock, betrayal, and suspense, setting the stage for a showdown that would redefine the boundaries of loyalty, morality, and survival in ways no one, not even Phyllis herself, could have predicted. And as Daniel's eyes met hers, unwavering and filled with a mixture of pity and resolve, the unspoken truth became undeniable. Phyllis Summers had finally met a force she could not manipulate. A revelation so powerful and dangerous that it could very well end the era of her untouchable reign, leaving the viewers, the audience, and the city itself on the edge of their seats, hearts pounding, minds racing, fully aware that in the world of the young and the restless, the line between triumph and tragedy, life and death, loyalty and betrayal, was as thin and fragile as the whisper of a secret, and Daniel, the unexpected harbinger of truth, had just crossed it. As the weight of Daniel's revelation settled over the room like a suffocating fog, Phyllis's carefully constructed veneer of confidence began to crack, revealing the raw panic that had been simmering beneath her poised exterior for years. She could feel her pulse hammering in her temples, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo through every fiber of her being, and as the whispers around her grew louder, curling through the air like smoke, the reality hit her with the force of a freight train. This was no longer a threat she could charm, manipulate, or maneuver her way out of, and in that instant, every choice, every deception, every calculated risk she had taken flashed before her eyes like a montage of her life in high-definition clarity, forcing her to confront the uncomfortable truth that Daniel, the man she had underestimated, had outmaneuvered her not with deceit, but with persistence, insight, and a commitment to exposing the very darkness she had believed was hidden forever. And the thought alone sent a shiver down her spine, mingling with the adrenaline that surged through her veins as she realized that the people she had counted on, friends, lovers, business allies, might now turn against her, seeing her vulnerability, smelling the fear she had worked so hard to conceal, while Daniel, standing steadfast, every muscle taut with the responsibility of truth, continued to lay out the harrowing details of her secret, each revelation like a scalpel cutting through layers of denial, making it impossible for Phyllis to breathe, impossible for her to spin her way out of the gathering storm. And as he spoke, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, the tension palpable, charged with the knowledge that they were all witnessing history in the making, that Phyllis Summers, the woman who had long been considered untouchable, was now exposed, and the danger she faced was no longer hypothetical. It was imminent, and it was deadly. In the shadows of the penthouse, figures who had long coveted her power, who had long nursed grudges against her cunning and her successes, began to shift subtly, their expressions a mix of astonishment and opportunism, calculating their next moves as if the revelation itself had unlocked a new battlefield, one where Phyllis's fall could mean their ascent, and every eye that darted toward her, every subtle smirk, every whispered conversation, became a dagger aimed at her back, forcing her to confront the chilling reality that in Genoa City, loyalty was as fleeting as a candle's flame in a gust of wind, and betrayal was always closer than one dared to imagine, and the thought that those she loved most, those she had trusted implicitly, might betray her first sent a cold knot of fear spiraling through her stomach, mixing with the frantic racing of her mind, as she tried desperately to formulate a plan to regain even a fraction of control over the situation. But the truth was like quicksand, pulling her deeper into the vortex of danger with every passing second, and Daniel, sensing her rising desperation, remained calm, almost clinical, his voice steady as he continued to unravel the web of secrets, each detail more damning than the last, painting a portrait of consequences so dire that even Phyllis's legendary resilience seemed momentarily powerless to withstand it. The room seemed to tilt around her as she tried to process the full scope of the revelation. Not only did her secret jeopardize her own life, but it also implicated individuals she cared about, tangled them in a web of danger and suspicion she could never have predicted, and the realization that her past actions had unleashed a chain reaction beyond her control was almost too much to bear, forcing her to stagger slightly as if the weight of the city itself rested upon her shoulders, while Daniel, unwavering, watched her with a mixture of resolve and pity, knowing that the moment he had been building toward had arrived, and that the fallout would not be contained to mere scandal. It would spiral, engulf, and redefine the very landscape of Genoa City's social, financial, and emotional spheres, leaving chaos in its wake. Phyllis's mind raced as she recalled the night that had triggered the chain of events Daniel was now exposing, the decisions she had made in desperation, the lies she had crafted to protect herself, the manipulations she had executed with surgical precision. All of it had seemed justified at the time, necessary even, yet now the enormity of the consequences loomed like a dark storm cloud ready to burst, and she felt the first pangs of genuine fear, a sensation she had long thought herself immune to, coursing through her veins, sharpening her senses and forcing her to consider every possible contingency, every escape route, every potential ally. And yet, as she scanned the room, she realized that the safety net she had always relied upon, the network of influence, intimidation, and charm, was threadbare, fragile, and possibly gone, leaving her standing alone in a sea of judgment, suspicion, and potential hostility. Meanwhile, whispers began to ripple through the gathered elite, the power players of Genoa City who had come to the gala expecting an evening of spectacle, gossip, and carefully curated interactions, only to find themselves trapped in the epicenter of one of the most explosive revelations the city had ever witnessed. And as murmurs grew into hushed conversations, as eyes widened and glances exchanged loaded with implication, Phyllis could feel the invisible weight of scrutiny pressing down on her. The realization sinking in that reputations, fortunes, and even lives could be altered by the disclosure of her secret, and the sense of danger, previously abstract, now took on a tangible, almost physical presence, wrapping around her like a constricting vine, each breath heavy with anxiety, each movement shadowed by the awareness that one misstep could trigger a cascade of consequences from which there would be no return. Daniel, sensing her panic, pressed forward, revealing not just the secret itself, but the extent of its impact, the dominoes that would inevitably fall if it remained unaddressed, the lives that had already been set in motion toward disaster. And as the gravity of the situation became undeniable, Phyllis's thoughts turned to those she loved most, her children, her closest confidants, her allies, wondering how they would process the revelations, whether they would stand by her or recoil in horror at the danger she had brought upon them, and the emotional torment of imagining their reactions added another layer of pressure, pushing her toward the edge of desperation, a place where even Phyllis Summers, master of manipulation and survival, felt unsteady, vulnerable, and alarmingly human. Outside the penthouse, the shadows of unseen observers shifted, figures whose motives were hidden and whose patience had been tested, individuals who had waited for precisely this moment to exploit the chaos, and the sense that danger was not confined to the immediate room, that threats lurked in every corner, every alley, every whispered conversation in the city, heightened Phyllis's awareness and magnified her fear, reminding her that the consequences of her past decisions were not theoretical. They were immediate, actionable, and potentially lethal, and Daniel, fully aware of the stakes, continued to present the evidence, each revelation deliberate, measured, ensuring that Phyllis could no longer deny, rationalize, or obscure the truth, leaving her with no choice but to confront the full scope of her actions, their repercussions, and the mortal danger that now stalked her. Phyllis's mind darted to Victor, the ever-dominant force in Genoa City whose influence extended into every shadow and crevice of power, and she realized with a jolt that even he might not be able, or willing, to shield her from the consequences this time. The city's power dynamics, already tense and precarious, threatened to shift irrevocably, and she understood that the next move she made would determine not only her survival, but the survival of everyone entangled in the web of her past. Decisions, and the thought of failure, of losing control, sent a cold, shivering terror through her core. At that moment, the room seemed to shrink further, the walls closing in as the magnitude of the revelation became fully apparent, and as Daniel's voice continued to resonate with unwavering clarity, detailing events, motivations, and consequences, Phyllis's gaze flickered to faces she thought she knew, searching for loyalty, support, recognition, anything to cling to, and in the sea of glances, she found both subtle judgment and veiled opportunism, realizing that the precarious alliances she had counted on might dissolve in the wake of her exposure, leaving her isolated in a landscape where danger was immediate and omnipresent, and the sense of mortal peril intensified, creeping into every corner of her consciousness, forcing her to acknowledge that survival would require more than charm, more than strategy. It would require raw courage, instinct, and perhaps the willingness to embrace risk on a scale she had never contemplated. Phyllis's pulse pounded like a relentless drum, her mind spinning with every possible outcome as she tried to cling to some semblance of control, but the truth Daniel had unearthed was a tidal wave that could not be contained, and as she glanced around the room, the realization that even her closest allies might not be able to protect her struck with brutal clarity, forcing her to consider that in the cutthroat world of Genoa City, survival was never guaranteed, and sometimes the people you trusted most were the ones who could betray you without hesitation, while Daniel, standing with an almost stoic resolve, seemed simultaneously compassionate and unyielding, as though he bore the dual burden of delivering justice while navigating the moral complexity of exposing someone he had once known intimately, and in that moment, the tension between them became almost unbearable, a charged electricity filling the space, as if the air itself was aware of the life-and-death stakes, the moral peril, and the inevitable fallout that would ripple through every corner of the city, touching families, fortunes, and friendships, unraveling the very fabric of trust and loyalty. And Phyllis, for the first time in years, felt truly exposed, truly vulnerable, her legendary cunning insufficient to shield her from the enormity of what was coming, the realization that her past had finally caught up with her, that every calculated lie, every carefully manipulated scenario, had led her to this precipice where danger lurked on all sides, unseen yet palpably threatening, and as she struggled to maintain her composure, her mind raced through contingencies, allies to call, enemies to deceive, escape routes to exploit, and yet even as she formulated plans, a creeping dread reminded her that the stakes were higher than ever, that a single misstep could mean disaster, not just for herself, but for everyone she cared about. And Daniel, unwavering, continued to expose the deadly consequences of her actions, each revelation a stark reminder that the past, no matter how carefully buried, had a way of returning with vengeance, leaving Phyllis to grapple with a terrifying and undeniable truth. In Genoa City, secrets are dangerous, power is fleeting, and survival is never guaranteed, and as the whispers of the gala attendees swirled around her like a storm, their hushed voices and widening eyes reflecting the shock and intrigue of the moment, Phyllis understood that the coming hours, days, and perhaps weeks would define not just her fate, but the fate of the city itself, as alliances shifted, hidden agendas surfaced, and the deadly consequences of her secret began to ripple outward in ways she could neither predict nor fully control, leaving her standing on the edge of chaos, facing a reckoning unlike anything she had ever imagined, and knowing, with a bone-deep certainty, that the game had changed forever. that the era of Phyllis Summer's untouchable reign had come to a terrifying and potentially deadly crossroads, and that Daniel, the unassuming harbinger of truth, had ignited a chain reaction that could either destroy her completely or, if she navigated it with unprecedented skill and courage, force her to reinvent herself amidst the ruins, reshaping the power dynamics of Genoa City forever.